Mini episode 102 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Royalty Tours USA, your ultimate resource to traveling in style to attend sporting events. Follow them on the web at royaltytours.blogspot.com.
The FDH Lounge. You want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
All right, folks, back with you again. Rick Morris, Kyle Ross. It's part 7 of the Kyle Ross 9-part History of WrestleMania anthology here in the FDH Lounge.
With Rick Morris, by the way, of course.
Yeah, Rick Morris,
okay,
Kyle Ross.
Don't put, I know when you put my name on the marquee, it sells out, but I mean, come on, Ricky, you're part of here.
Well, the name on the marquee also says wrestling, as the Briscoe brothers once said.
Yes.
But and it's a good thing that it is named after you. I might be counting on you to carry the action here today. For anybody that can hear this now, allergies have robbed me of my, I won't say stellar pipes, but average pipes. So I know I sound like dog crap in this thing, but I am playing, not exactly playing hurt today. I don't feel that bad, but this is just my allergies.
You look well.
I'm actually not that bad. I got some rest yesterday. It's all good, fortunately.
You were in Austin, by the way, all last week.
Austin all last week, yes.
A fine city.
Yeah, it was
Shout
tremendous.
out to my good friend Chad Repack, who lives in the shadows of Austin, Texas.
Oh,
and I know we'll be listening to this.
What a wonderful place. Yeah. Love Austin, Texas, down there for South by Southwest Interactive. It was tremendous. And it was immediately after coming back on it from the trip that I pretty much lost my voice here. And again, allergies being what they are, with this kind of weather we're getting here in northeastern Ohio from where we're based, unseasonably warm. But the fluctuation in temperatures is doing us to be. Good thing we are only recording this one here today as opposed to another 2 chapters. This one's a standalone here. Part 7 of this
It's
here.
a big one, though.
Yes, it is a big one. It is the birth and death, I think you titled this, of the Attitude Era, WrestleManias 14 to 18.
Yes, so we're going to cover 5 WrestleManias in here. And I know that there's some people who are like, wow, you devoted a lot of time to, just 1 or 2 WrestleManias, sometimes 3 per podcast previously with the first 6. And why are you doing so many now in one? Obviously the knee-jerk reaction would be say, oh, well, we've fallen behind and need to catch up. But it's not that at all.
You planned it this way. You laid it out.
This was laid out this way. That the overall mentality of the promotion was pretty similar through a lot of these WrestleManias, so there's a lot of commonalities
right.
That we can just kind of hit on in one. And that's in 14 through 18, like I said, the birth and death of Attitude. It's 18 is kind of like, I didn't know whether to include it or not in this one, but considering the way I wanted to approach 19 through 21, which we'll hit next, the 3 of them together, it made sense.
Well, and it's one of those things where we're going to be setting up the macro heading into the first one here for 14, but there's not as much we have to set up for the macro from year to year because with this one, we're coming out of a period of extreme inconsistency because in the past it had been, okay, 2 new guys on top will try this, now we'll try this, now we'll try this. We're going into an era with a unified theme, and there really hadn't been a unified theme to a certain era since the boom period of the 80s.
Very true. But even the difference between, say, WrestleManias 15 and 18 in terms of who's on top is a lot different than even, say, the first boom period that you look at. Sure, you had your consistencies of Hogan and Savage, but other than those 2, there really was a lot more turnover year to year in the promotion than you'll see in this period.
Right.
Which allows us to cover, I think, a few more than we could in previous podcasts.
Exactly. When we left this last with the WrestleMania 13 one, we were heading out of the Bret Austin match that would come to set up really the start of the Attitude Era with the taking off of Stone Cold Steve Austin as the franchise.
Yes, and from that point on, and it's funny, I think I referenced this in the last podcast, Mick Foley talked about how throughout 1997, those in the WWE locker room, although the ratings did not bear this out at the time, were of the opinion that they had the better show. And in retrospect, he's absolutely correct. it was kind of, at the time, though, I remember watching, and it was so good to be a wrestling fan. I mean, the Monday Night Wars really picked up, and it did seem pretty even, I thought, throughout 99. Now, WCW had far more depth.
Right.
But it was very obvious that outside of the NWO, the WWE had WWF at the time, had the much hotter acts. Austin. The Hart Foundation did the massive heel turn. You had the beginnings, and this was kind of toward the end of the summer and into the fall. The Rock, Rocky Maivia becoming The Rock and really nailing down his heel shtick. DX was born in the fall of 1997 when Michaels doing his massive heel turn post SummerSlam and bringing along Buddy Triple H, who was kind of mired in the mid-card. He's considered mid-card for life, was always the joke with Triple H at the time, and that's a lot funnier, obviously, right now. And he kind of ditched the snobby persona and just palled around with Shawn Michaels.
I always thought that was kind of jarring. The thing with Triple H was when he would change personas, they never would really explain it that much. And the old kayfabe kid in me needs to understand.
I remember just being like, he always came out, and did a little curtsy and stuff like that. And then one week he just started coming out in polo shirt and jeans. I'm like, that's fine with me. That's fine with me.
Shouldn't it have been, okay, at the very least, I was affecting this previous thing, and I'm done with it now.
I guess. But I mean,
I guess that's implied by what happened, but still, I thought it was sloppy. Dot the I's and cross the T's, please.
I'll say this.
Yeah.
I bought him far more as Shawn Michaels' less talented buddy than as an aristocrat. So it worked for me, okay? Because I thought he played that role a lot better. So.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. There's no question.
But the bottom line is, I remember, and obviously the big thing in the fall of '97 is as we get to WrestleMania 14, the big thing was obviously the Montreal Screwjob with Bret Hart. And at that point, we talked about just a moment ago, those in the locker room, and Mick Foley, obviously, was a big part of what they were doing in '97, obviously, that there was the mentality that the WWE was putting on the better show. And certainly they're a great Raw, I think it was in May of '97, where Austin hijacked the ambulance with Bret Hart.
Right.
Jumped, that one, obviously, people remember that one. But despite that, the ratings did not bear out the fact that WWE was the better show at all.
Right.
As a matter of fact, by the end of '97, they were in a lot of trouble when the Bret Hart thing came to fruition because it was very clear he was going to WCW. WCW was ahead in the ratings. They were building to what should have been, and this is a different podcast for a different day, don't let me go down this road, what should have been their WrestleMania 3, Starrcade '97.
Right.
Instead it was a disgrace. One of the worst pay-per-views I've ever seen. Again, a different podcast for a different day. Oh, by the way, who's to blame for that? Just keep that in mind when I start ripping on a you-know-who later on in this podcast.
Get there. We'll talk about that with 18.
Okay.
Yeah.
And on paper, when you're going to lose your top guy, Bret Hart was the champion. He won it at SummerSlam to justify the big heel turn, and it was deservingly so, his fifth reign. It looked over, man, for the WWE. I mean, unless you were a real diehard, and because Austin was hurt at this time too. On paper, it looked like nothing short of disaster for the WWF. And lo and behold, it not only was it not disaster. Now there are a lot of it. Again, don't have enough time to go into all these things. WCW's complete mishandling of Bret Hart coming into their promotion, a big thing. But even if they had handled it well, I don't know if that mattered. Because Austin does come back. They found ways to involve him in the show. The biggest one was when he stunned McMahon for the first time in MSG, September of '97. And although he wasn't wrestling, he was still really, really over. It was a serious neck injury he suffered against Owen Hart, but it was clear he was going to be fine again. It was clear that he was going to be able to work WrestleMania. It was pretty obvious probably by the end of December that he was going to win the Royal Rumble, go on not only and challenge Shawn Michaels, but beat Shawn Michaels in the main event at WrestleMania. And he was the man. I mean, it started, like you said, when we last left off with the WrestleMania 13 podcast. It was just... You really can't quantify just how much better he was than everyone else in the business at that point.
Yeah, he was.
As a draw.
He was. And in retrospect, again, and that's part of it too, you can look at it that addition by subtraction, Hart and Michaels were out of the way. Michaels because of the back injury he would suffer at Royal Rumble '98. Hart because of going to the WCW promotion. You could look at it that way. Again, maybe they just kind of got lucky there. But I look at it, and maybe it's a little bit of revisionist thinking. I'm not going to say if Bret Hart took the title, it would have been no big deal. But it's a thing where they still had Austin. And that was all they needed. That was really all they needed going forward here. I think at the time we got a little bit too much caught up in the other major players there. But Austin was going to be the big player the next couple of years, and maybe that should have been a little bit more apparent even when Montreal went down.
Yeah, but again, at the time, to be fair, and it maybe is a little revisionist because you didn't know he was hurt. Is he going to? I mean,
that's true. His neck.
He wrestled at Survivor Series. It was a real weak match against Owen Hart, but and then he, the following month, wrestled Rock, who obviously becomes the other big player in this situation, more so down the road than late '97. They did kind of a garbagey brawl, but he was fine. But you didn't know really until kind of WrestleMania rolled around. I remember watching. I was like, oh my, here's my point. At the end of 1997, to say Stone Cold Steve Austin could become a bigger draw than Hulk Hogan was in his big period would have been a highly questionable statement. About 6 months later, it was very obvious that he was going to be.
Yeah.
And he was. The numbers bear that out. Any of these people who say, Hogan, this, Hogan, look, the man drew some amazing crowds. He was the linchpin of the first boom era. If you took his name off the card, that said card would suffer.
Right.
But Austin was drawing, they were doing record business in every building they were in throughout 1998 for weekly Monday Night Raws.
Right.
They set records almost weekly.
Yep.
They were drawing, which is just unbelievable. So,
well, for the final piece of macro before we get to WrestleMania 14, because we're setting it up pretty well here.
I know I think.
We are. We're doing a very good job, if I do say so myself. Too bad the camera doesn't catch me patting myself on the back here. But your theory about something Gary Hart once said, and
it's
about
Gary
why,
Hart's theory. It's just me
regurgitating
exactly.
You're
regurgitating
it. Yeah. But how that ties into this?
Gary Hart, and I believe this was on. As a matter of fact, I'm positive it was on because it's the only thing he would commentate on that I would have watched in the last 5 years. One of the world-class TVs. It's probably the independently produced one, not the WWE produced one, because the WWE would, of course, edited a comment like this off. Okay,
right.
But he made the comment, and he was talking about the promotion he was booking for world-class down in Texas in the early 80s, that if you're looking to take off, if you're looking to really make a big impact, you need to start over with all new guys. Now, he being Gary Hart, was handed a very easy plate to work with when he was given the Von Erich boys.
Yeah, he had old guys that weren't over, and he had the Von Erichs and the Freebirds coming in.
Yeah, and so basically, and it was a little different where, certainly you didn't need to worry about the depth. You didn't need world class in 1982. Did not need the manpower on a roster that, say, the WWE needs today.
Top heavy promotion. It was always about 2 or 3 cards on the show. Or the matches on the card.
Yes, but when I think about Gary Hart saying you got to start fresh, you got to go with all new guys because they're all hungry, they're all pushing each other, there's no politics. I always think about this period building up to WrestleMania 14. How if you look at the card, it was all guys who were relatively, not necessarily new, but fresh in their roles. Some guys had been around for a while, others had not, but they were all guys that had a chip on their shoulder. I wasn't in the locker room at the time, never have been. I got to imagine the feeling was pretty good in that locker room, the mentality. It was kind of a real team as opposed to, most wrestling locker rooms where it's anything but. Certainly compared to WCW at that same time period.
Right.
I think it was a more unified locker room. But I just think of that and that the Bret Hart getting, quote-unquote, screwed and Shawn Michaels getting injured at the Rumble did work to their benefit. It's kind of the opposite now where they're given things that seem like a slam dunk and they kind of screw it up.
Right.
Back then, it seemed like they were dealt hands like, oh, no, this is bad.
Right.
And not only would it not be bad, it would somehow work itself out because it had Bret and Shawn kind of still been around. First of all, their relationship had grown so toxic it would have torn apart the locker room.
Right.
But it would have weighed the cards down because you would have always had to find a way throughout 1998 to put Bret in a match near the top, put Shawn in a match, and it would have just, while they're two incredible workers, 2 of the top 5 best in-ring guys of all time, maybe top 2, top 3, along with Ric Flair, it wouldn't have been good for the overall mentality of the promotion because they were going attitude. It was a new era, and those guys were associated with kind of rightly or wrongly, with the down period. And so, although it makes no sense on paper, it worked to their benefit that Bret Hart was gotten rid of at Survivor Series 97, and then Shawn Michaels wrestles for the final time for 4.5 years at this show, WrestleMania 14.
I agree, and basically, again, it shows that Vince can only really spin gold when his back's against the wall and all the odds are against him. If you hand him a bunch of stuff on a silver platter, he'll underachieve like hell. But if his back's to the wall, he'll make something with nothing.
And by the way, I've always thought about this. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you want to give Vince credit for this because his back was against the wall and he probably had to. Jim Ross and Jim Cornette were two of his point men at this period. Okay, a lot better than some of the shpabools he's got as his point men these days. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, they were guys who were not of his mentality in this business.
Right.
You know, Jim Ross, when he was in charge of talent relations, wasn't looking in beauty magazines. Okay.
Yeah, that's true.
He hires a Steve Austin, a Mick Foley, a Brian Pillman, guys who had. It was non-Vince people, non-conventional WWE guys. So you'll see that this is probably one of the most unlikely WrestleManias to succeed, WrestleMania 14. I think it's one of the best ever. It's a top 4 WrestleMania for me, beating shows that have probably a lot better wrestling on them and a lot better star power. But when you watch WrestleMania 14, kids, okay, you're going to be like,
it's fun.
Wow. You're like, this was a fun WrestleMania, and I can't wait to see where. Now, obviously, in retrospect, we all know where they went.
Right.
But I remember watching this time. It's like, God, I can't wait for Raw tomorrow night. And I remember that Raw the night after the show was one of the best Raws they ever did. Where Triple H assumed power of DX.
It was.
The Austin McMahon feud McMahon established himself as the top heel in the promotion. It was just a great period. And whereas you could see the WWE coming back after WrestleMania 13 because of Austin's performance in the match with Bret Hart, you could see very clearly after the show that they were going to overtake WCW in the ratings.
Yeah, they were going in that direction. Last thing I'm going to say, a macro note before we set this up, just a little bit of a counterpoint to Gary Hart's point. I agree, but if you don't have the right ingredients, nothing matters, because my first counterpoint thought would be, like, say, AWA 1987. That was a new crew.
Okay, yeah.
And they sucked.
Yeah, well, it was a new crew out of necessity, not a new crew out of scouting. You know what I'm saying?
Right,
I mean,
right.
It was a little different. Where
theoretically, in a big promotion, you can always go get guys you want rather than getting stuck with guys like the AWA did in 87.
They were being stuck. It's not like they were going out and finding those guys. It was like, okay, we just lost all of our top guys, and we just need to have, we have these cards, and someone's got to be on top of them. Whereas, in the case of Gary Hart, he was, again, handed on a silver platter. The owner of the company's like, here are my sons. They're going to be the featured baby faces in this company.
Right.
Well, they're new, and it worked very well for at least for a
and the
couple of
Freebirds
years.
had already gotten themselves over in Georgia Championship Wrestling to various extent. I'm not downplaying what Gary Hart did. Still great booking, but you also got to have the ingredients. WrestleMania
and
14.
They had the new talent and the ingredients here.
Yeah, exactly.
For this WrestleMania.
And this WrestleMania, this was the changing of the guard, moving out of the period of uncertainty of the previous couple of WrestleManias when it would be different from year to year. Last note that I have, and this is something I came across late in the game when I was preparing to do this with you here, I was looking back through. I had subscribed from late 97 to late 99 to the Torch, and I still have those at home. So I was flipping through, looking at them. It's interesting that as far back as January of 98, because of the whole angle with Mike Tyson and everything set up
we
with
should
him,
definitely talk about
we'll talk
that
about
here.
that. But Wade Keller was saying January of 98, and I applaud him for this because I sure wouldn't have thought this at that time.
I don't applaud Wade Keller very often.
I don't either, and I'm a big fan of certain proclivities of his, but be that as it may, I got to give it to him for this. Because it's I think you're picking up what I'm putting down there.
Thank you, Tim Hardaway.
Yeah, thank you. But I give him so much credit because in January of 98, he said in the Torch, this is shaping up to be the biggest WrestleMania in a decade. Now, look, he's wrong on that one. You'd have to go back to maybe WrestleMania 8. That was still pretty big.
Oh, I think this was bigger than 8.
In January of 98 to say that's remarkable that he called it 2 months out.
It was, and I just read something that Meltzer had written that he knew the Tyson deal would be big.
Right.
But no one saw the near 800,000 buys this show
Right.
got, which was huge. When you consider, and keep in mind, that's 800,000 domestic kids. Okay,
Right.
that's not like now where they factor in international.
Right. How many guys in a hut in Guam were watching?
Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. We'll count those as 17 buys. No. The previous WrestleMania domestically did like 275-ish.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a huge increase from year to year. WrestleMania 13 is the least bought WrestleMania of all time. And for that to jump, obviously, it was two things. It was the involvement of Tyson, who was still a major marketing name. His star had begun to fade in boxing,
right.
but it's kind of a novelty act and a name.
Still a huge pop culture guy.
Meant a lot. And then, obviously the rising star Austin. You put those two elements together, and it was just unbelievable. Obviously, in January of '98, they did the big angle on Raw where they were going to announce Tyson's involvement in WrestleMania. They do the thing where Austin comes out and calls him out. That was huge. That made Austin look like such a star when he came out and was like, because it's sort of ridiculous to have Steve Austin come out, oh yeah, Mike Tyson, I can beat your ass.
Right.
Like come on.
Right.
But what was crazy, it didn't matter that is ridiculous because people bought it.
Yeah.
People were like, yeah, you can, yeah, do it. And it's just like,
CNN was all over it, and they had a sister company that was a big wrestling promotion.
Yeah, and then, exactly. And, it was on, it made ESPN.
Sports Center moment.
This felt a lot cooler than, like, the desperation of LT that we spoke of in the last podcast.
Right.
Tyson, again, like in LT, was past his athletic
They found
prime,
a way to make it work.
But he still, and then I was there, of course. I don't know if you were. At
was
that
not.
famous Cleveland Raw, March of '98.
I was not.
Oh,
yeah,
you were?
I was
Where
not.
Tyson, I remember that was such a good angle where Michaels called him out for a face-to-face. They were acting like they were going to do the same thing that Tyson did with Austin, and he rips the shirt off. Tyson's got the DX shirt on underneath. Jim Ross with that great line. This wasn't exactly the Sports Center moment I was looking for. And so it sets it up with Tyson, because Tyson was getting a negative reaction.
Right.
That was kind of when that element of the crowd, previous crowds were always very complimentary, respectful towards celebrities.
Right.
The crowd had changed. A WWE crowd had changed dramatically in 1997. Right. They began to incorporate elements of EC, like an EC. It wasn't, obviously, it was nowhere near approaching like the smartness of an ECW crowd.
Right.
But it was always like these kind of like, I remember the signs were like, I always used to love like checking out the signs when they started in the 90s. It was so much different that like everyone brought a sign. They were funny. It wasn't like Cena rules with a Z. It was, Triple H mid-card for life. I remember like one guy in Canada the one time, he had 7 guys, holding up each letter. It said HBK equals fag. Okay? I mean, you talk about something that they wouldn't show today.
Well, I brought one the one time, and I had a lot of ones had the down arrows. I had the one with the down arrow that I would hold up over the guy in front of me that said Pat Patterson's boy toy. So,
okay, there you go. I'd rather be in China. That was always
that was one. Or with the down arrow, Joey Tribbiani's hand twin. So we would do ones like that.
Yeah, or I always love the ones too where it would just be some random guy like Steve Jones sucks. Like those were always good. So it was all the elements were there. It was a different crowd. You just felt it was just really fun going into the show. And this is the Boston crowd. Okay, I know that in certain parts of this town here in Cleveland, Ohio, we hate Boston. Okay, they get too much Sports Center coverage.
I'm one of those parts.
Yeah, I know you are. Okay, well, give a big thumbs up. And by the way, this is one of. Well, it's not the one. I guess it is one of the last non-stadium WrestleManias, I guess. And for all the people who talk about the pluses of the arena over a stadium show, which is the number one is the crowd just more intimate. It feels like a hotter crowd. Definitely, Exhibit A is this show right here. A molten hot crowd in Boston that night. Red
hot crowd, and again, they made the most of it with the Tyson. Angle. Looking at the undercard, there were a couple of notable things here. In the opening match, LOD 2000, as they make their way to the ring, winning a 15 tag team battle royal. I'm looking down the list of luminaries: the New Midnight Express, the Old Rock and Roll Express, the Truth Commission. Boy, it shows you we weren't much into the era, aside from Tyson, of celebrities at WrestleMania, because I would have thought Nelson Mandela would have come to the ring with the Truth Commission.
Well,
there's my geopolitical joke
of the
night.
Jackal instead. Don Callis. This was a total throwaway. It was not exactly a very well-kept secret that the LOD, who had done this split angle, they got into a fight. It was supposed to be we're going to come back and kind of be re-christened. They were going to
put out there with Sonny.
Yeah, Sonny was involved, and it's kind of funny that Sonny was put with her because this was kind of, it made sense because the LOD always carried, they're the LOD, man. You know what I'm saying? I mean, they were always, a big name no matter what they were doing. But it's kind of funny that of all the things they tried on paper again, this looks like a no-brainer. Okay, Sonny, a big name from the last couple of years, hot. LOD, famous team. Okay, let's put them together. LOD's obviously going to go on to win the tag team titles. It was not a well-kept secret that this whole stupid battle royal was just there to put them over. Puts them over, but they did not really go anywhere from there. They kind of quickly morphed in the OLD, as I like to call them, because they just weren't new.
Right.
The new, pardon the pun, the New Age Outlaws were, who we'll talk about.
The futuristic biker gear wasn't over. Insert the Sonny holding their helmets punchline here.
Yeah, and Hawk was, in all due respect, was not well. At this point, I mean, I think he was kind of off the rocker.
Yeah.
So this was, of all the positive things we just talked about this period in this show, this Battle Royal was not one of them.
Right. They eliminated Bombastic Bob and Bodacious Bart to win the Battle Royal.
Yeah.
Ironically enough, not Bart's worst WrestleMania moment. That'll come the next year.
Yeah, really.
Some throwaways here on the undercard. Taka Michinoku, a 5-minute, 57-second match. He defends the light heavyweight championship against Aguila.
Yeah, and that's Essa Rios with a mask.
Yeah.
And, you don't need to write a book to let people know that the one thing WCW always did much better than WWF was the cruiserweight / light heavyweight. Taka was, they had started it probably, the division, just because WCW was having some success with it.
He was over at the outset because he was great.
Well, he wasn't supposed to be the linchpin of the division. It was supposed to be Great Sasuke. Yeah. And Vince kind of thought Taka outshined him at the Canadian Stampede pay-per-view, so he's like, well, screw it, I'm going to make Taka my champion. They did kind of, not raid isn't the right term, but they did get some talent, some other talent from Michinoku Pro. Of course, the great Dick Togo and Kaientai came over shortly. But look, it didn't matter.
Sweet-ass senton.
Yeah, yes. It didn't matter. Taka was over, but look, this division by the end of the year was a joke.
Right. Two guys soon to be in a double turn, Triple H defending the European Championship against Owen Hart. They did the angle with Sergeant Slaughter. Handcuffed to China at ringside. She gets out the powder. Boom, boom, bam. Triple H wins.
Look, there are a lot of people, my good friend Chad Repack being one of them, that thought Owen Hart got such...
The Bob Sacramento of our show.
Yes. Felt that Owen Hart got such mistreatment here by doing the job. I couldn't agree less. Owen Hart, look,
they already neutered him by this point. The momentum he had coming back as the angry badass loner was already gone.
He should not have beaten Shawn Michaels for the title. I know that from his character's perspective, it would have been nice, but
they needed to save Michaels for Austin.
Exactly. And Triple H again. He was what was new. It was China did the low blow and stuff. A lot of this was to put her over too, and she was a big part of Triple H still during this period. And the right guy won. This was by the way, this is when the European title, people still cared about that. So
during those 5 minutes.
Yes, but right guy goes over. Triple H the next night, becomes the new leader of DX, which eventually a group that goes babyface.
Yep.
By the way, a year previous, how ridiculous did babyface Triple H sound?
That's
how
true.
ridiculous. Well, I guess now it's not so ridiculous, but that was he was so much different during that period than he is previously or certainly now.
Yeah, he really was. But
Owen, he gets. I mean, I don't really want to go into that.
Yeah, I mean, and they did the right thing turning him heel because he was lost in the shuffle as a face.
I mean, the
at that
nation.
point.
It was kind of silly.
Yeah,
and
being,
by kind
being
of,
the white
I mean
guy in the nation,
really silly. But with The Rock, The Rock politically, he never liked kind of the black separatist element of the nation he's always talked about. So I think they just did that. It was just a heel group that he was.
Right.
I mean, look, Owen Hart never really fit into that, but I mean, the Nugget thing, it was always kind of over.
It was the Attitude Era. You would have thought they would have busted out an Al Jolson gimmick for him or something, but that would have fit in. Mark Marrow and Sable defeated the artist formerly known as Goldust and Luna in a mixed tag team match in 9 minutes and 11 seconds.
When I use the term or phrase, whichever you may be, a match that was better than it ever had any right to be.
Right.
This match probably pictured in the encyclopedia.
But Mero, Rhodes, and Luna all above average workers.
Yeah, but that's not what mattered.
Right.
It mattered a little bit. The bottom, Sable was probably the number 2 star on this show.
And it's amazing.
People forget
Yeah,
that
the ratings
because her star fell so quickly
right.
after this. But she was so big there, and she tried really hard during this, and the crowd was so... I mean, she was doing, like, at the time, like, now it's not that big of a deal, but, like, to see someone kind of doing, like, men's... Like, a chick who... She had never really wrestled before this.
Right.
I don't think she'd ever wrestled. Going out and doing men's finishing moves.
Right.
Like, she did the power bomb and stuff like that. Like, people, like, came... I remember I was watching the big group. The place just came unglued. She did the TKO, Mero's move.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she was... Gold Dust, who was so shameless during this period, was really selling for... This was better than it had any right to be. This is like a 3.5 star match. I mean, this is just, like,
right.
one of those things that's like, oh, God, just, like, come on, get through it. Let's get to the... This was very enjoyable, and again, the new Sable, you know, Mero, it's kind of funny. After this, he was kind of just useless, you know. He was kind of a funny, you know, misogynistic heel for a little bit after this, but, you know, Sable was clearly the star, and she was put over accordingly here.
She was, yeah. The Rock defending the Intercontinental title against Ken Shamrock by disqualification at only 4:49. That was a short one. They did the gimmick where Shamrock beat him but wouldn't let go of the thing, and I think they reversed it by...
Yeah, they reversed the decision because he kept, like, he refused to let go of the ankle lock.
And The Rock had already done the interview earlier in the show with Jennifer Flowers, which was hilarious. He's getting his catchphrases out. The people I was watching this with were really, really laughing their asses off, and it was one of those things I said to you off air. This show was the beginning of where you could see, boy, they're going to have to turn him at some point. When they do, he's going to be pretty hot. Yeah,
you didn't. I mean, he certainly was not, you wouldn't have predicted that he would have been the foil for Austin the next year. I don't think that... I'm trying to kind of remember where my mentality was with him at that time. I would not have guessed defending world heavyweight champion the next year at WrestleMania.
But by the same token... You couldn't hardly look at this crew and see anybody as a challenger for Austin.
No, it wasn't.
Keep in mind how much of a stretch it seemed like to put him in with Foley right after WrestleMania.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and it just goes back to, hey, you got to start over. You got to go with new talent, and the match here is irrelevant because it worked well. I know that from a star rating snowflake standpoint, this is not a world-beating match,
right?
But here's the key. It kept Shamrock looking strong. See, rather than matches that they do today where no one comes out looking good,
right.
Both guys came out. Shamrock looked strong. He was playing in the kind of the insane, fighter gimmick.
Yep.
And then I'll never forget, though, they reversed the decision, and The Rock who got like no offense into the match, gets stretchered out, and they announce the decision's been reversed. Still Intercontinental Champion, The Rock, and they show him getting stretchered out, and he lifts the belt up like he just did something, like he won. And it was such a great heel move. And I remember Jim Ross going, "The Irishman's been robbed in Boston," and then Shamrock goes crazy and beats him up again on the stretcher. And again, it was everyone was kind of like, "You're right, this Rock's pretty entertaining," and the Shamrock's pretty badass. So again, mission accomplished.
The SummerSlam '93 match wants its finish back. way to ape the Bret Hart Jerry Lawler.
Yeah, but this was
guys.
better. This was cooler.
This is everything that one.
Although Jerry Lawler's story before that match was tremendous. I believe how he saved the orphans from the burning bus.
Yeah, that was tremendous. 10 minutes and 1 second in a dumpster match for the WWF Tag Team title. The Cactus Jack and Chainsaw Charlie defeated the New Age Outlaws. They would, I guess, refund the belts the next night. In a rematch here, Chainsaw Charlie, the moniker for this time period, for whatever reason, of Terry Funk.
I have no idea why they did that. Like, they referred to him as Terry Funk a lot on commentary. Like, Jim Ross kind of like just no-sold the whole gimmick. I think he just wasn't going to call him. I think he like half-heartedly did it at the beginning.
Right.
And then by this, like, I remember like they even called him, Road Dogg even called him Terry Funk. Again, this is kind of interesting because in some regards, it does go against the mentality we talked about the show, where it kind of went to the even though Cactus is never someone you associate with tradition. Certainly at this time, he was a guy that really got his big breakout following the show, the heel turn that he did. When he was the corporate suck-up dude love for Vince McMahon, which I enjoyed so much. But the New Age Outlaws, look, I know that like now everyone's like, oh, they stink, they were bad, they're terrible. they were really hot, man, at this point. They were guys that, they had, and it was, again, one of those things that on paper seemed terrible, but worked out. You had two total JTTS guys.
Right.
That had just been bad for a long time. They tried doing the Rockabilly heel turn in '97, where he was the protege of the Honky Tonk Man. That was a colossal flop. Almost as bad as the real Jesse James, for the Road Dogg. And then they just kind of came together one week. You're like, these two bums are going to form a team? Seems like somebody's not trying. Seems like the bottom of the Pat Patterson gimmick barrel. And it works. They just had unbelievable chemistry.
In an insanely hot year for the company, I'd say they were probably the number 3 act behind Rock and Austin.
And everyone
not in
says,
that order.
Yeah, everyone kind of selfishly. I'd put Sable ahead of them too.
Okay.
But still, everyone kind of accuses them of being kind of shamelessly putting themselves over when they claim they were the hotter part of the babyface version of DX.
They were.
I agree completely. Their catchphrase. X-Pac had a lot of charisma, but in WWE land, he's really small and he's not going to get a fair shake probably.
Right.
Triple H was certainly during the babyface DX era, the guy with the least amount of charisma. He was the leader, but he was had the least amount of charisma. They really were the guys, people. And again, I think the guy on the internet now rolls his eyes about the New Age Outlaws and their catchphrase. People, I was in college shortly after this. I was a senior in high school when this WrestleMania happened, but I was college. People loved doing that, that shtick they did, ladies and gentlemen, boys.
It was contagious.
Yeah, it was. People loved that, and they lose here as a dumpster. By the way, there was a great angle to set this up where Cactus and Funk were just wrestling randomly on a Raw.
Right.
They tackled each other in a dumpster. The Outlaws came out, shut the dumpster, and pushed it over the edge.
One of the only breakings of kayfabe that was smoothly done that I think I've ever seen. It's usually ham-handed, but the way that everybody showed concern,
yes,
it was
Sonny came out crying.
Textbook, yes, textbook.
Yeah, Sonny did come out crying. I did love when Shawn Michaels and Triple H tried to hog the limelight in a segment. They came out and say, "See, now you'll be main eventers." that was Shawn probably pilled out of his mind at that time, but
true.
That's okay. But they lose here just kind of. Because it kind of works out, the baby faces need to get revenge.
Right.
But then they did the immediate rematch the next night on Raw, the steel cage match, where the Outlaws win it back. And with the new DX, X-Pac debuts, obviously, the next night, comes into the promotion. He cuts a red-hot promo, burying Hogan and Bischoff.
That was glorious.
Which, when you better not step short, Hulk, otherwise Eric Bischoff will go so far up your ass, he'll know what you had for breakfast. And they weren't immediately baby faces. DX, it was one of those things that it's like, wow, everyone's just cheering these guys. Might as well make them a babyface.
Well, and then when they had Owen turn and join the Nation,
yeah,
that was the emphasis of a double turn.
I loved the DX. By the way, as far as mid-card feuds go, the DX versus Nation feud of the summer '98, one of the all-time best.
It really, really was. The next one, 16 minutes 58 seconds, kind of long for two guys like this, but I guess it worked okay. The Undertaker defeated Kane in the long-awaited first match between them.
Notice long-awaited first match. Okay, I don't think anyone's awaiting any more of these. But the first of about 10,002, that they've had. And this was kind of the one match that maybe didn't hit expectations. I thought at the time it seemed kind of boring. And I remember, now the entrance was awesome. Obviously, the build-up to this was incredible. Where they had Kane debut at Hell in the Cell the previous fall. By the way, some people think that takes away from that match. I couldn't.
I kind of do.
I couldn't.
It didn't have a clean ending to it.
Yeah, but Shawn Michaels won. I thought the whole story of the match was they were putting him in this big cage, and the only way he could conceivably win is if the Undertaker's half brother, who had been presumably dead for 20 years, just happened to show up at the arena that night and help him. And, it's wrestling, and guess what? That happens.
Personal prejudice on my part. It's just I don't know how a match can be 5 stars if a guy wins entirely due to an outside interference.
I give it the full Monty.
Okay.
I give it the full. I think that was not only not a bad ending, I thought it was the only possible ending you do.
Sure. I'm just saying I think it puts a lower ceiling on the match than you do. But
I thought that was the only ending you could do. Because the obvious thing was Michaels had to win.
Right.
But how is he going to win? He's not going to, what's he going to beat him clean with? They were still kind of in the period, too, where heels don't win clean.
Right.
And I'm kind of old school like that. I don't think heels should, because if a babyface loses clean, that doesn't look good. I think most fans kind of view him as a loser then.
Right.
I thought it was a great ending. But anyway, to this match, so Kane, he starts the Undertaker, kind of similar to the Bret Owen thing. I would never fight my brother. And eventually, Kane lights the casket on fire when the Undertaker loses the Royal Rumble match.
Right.
And the Undertaker comes, again, at that same Cleveland Raw that Tyson turned and joined DX. The Undertaker returns, challenges him to a match. This didn't really live up to expectations. I remember being shocked that Kane kind of got his heat back afterwards, because Kane to me always seemed like kind of like a Nails character, and always has, in the way that his character is so tied to another character that I always assumed going into this WrestleMania that Kane was kind of going to be like a one-and-done act. He would be beaten cleanly here, and he'd be gone. Keep in mind, wrestling fans, that was 13 years ago, and this idiot's still in the promotion.
I've always been more of a Glenn Jacobs guy, not merely because he's a fan of Austrian economics, but no, I've always thought for a big man, he's an above-average worker.
That has nothing to do with it. But the character itself, when you look at a character, okay, first of all,
wrestling's had a lot of madman characters. Are we going to dismiss them all and say that no madman character should be long-standing?
No, you're missing the point. It's not that he's a madman. It's not that he's above it. His character, as preposterous as this storyline was, and people need to remember, before he debuted...
It's been retconned a million times.
Before that he had debuted the way he did, which, by the way, is another reason that I love that debut. When that storyline started, when Paul Bear's like, you have a brother who you think is dead, but he's still alive.
Right.
People were rolling their eyes like, this sounds hideous.
Right.
And then he debuted, and people were like, oh, wow, they couldn't have done that any better. When you have a storyline, let's take a look at the storyline. As ridiculous as the storyline is, here's a guy who's been presumed dead for 20 years. Okay, hold the Undertaker responsible. What's he going to, have a 6-month feud with the guy and then go on to other things? I always thought that, he was so tied to the one character that was his shelf life.
No, see, I always thought that he would stick around because, and it's not 20/20 hindsight, because I saw him as a guy where they were just looking for the right thing to do with him, and he came in with such, as you said, phenomenal build. He came in with that because he had been Unabomb and Smoky Mountain Wrestling. He'd already been, fake Diesel previously.
Yeah, but most people didn't know that.
No, Isaac Yankem, but it was one of those things where I saw him as a guy where they saw him as somebody they wanted to do something big with, but they just hadn't figured it out. When he came in with such epic build, I didn't think he was a disposable character. I really didn't.
Well, he was really hot. So, but I'm just saying, if you look at the history of the company and the history of really the business, when you have a character who is specifically brought, you have to remember, he was specifically brought in to feud with the Undertaker. He was not a character. Okay, this is his story. Oh, he's feuding with the Undertaker now. It was a character that was devised, and then to feud with. There was a storyline basically for the Undertaker.
Right.
And I don't know when the decision was made. I don't know if it was before the storyline started. They liked Glenn Jacobs and wanted to put him in a storyline. Okay, we could do this. Or if they had a storyline, okay, we're going to bring back the Undertaker's presumed dead brother Kane. Who should we have played? Okay, how about this Glenn Jacobs guy? He's got some talent.
Okay.
I don't know what came first. But to me, when you look at the history, I remember thinking it's okay, the Undertaker will beat Kane, and that's pretty much it for Kane. I never would have thought, going into that show, that 13 years later, Kane would still be in the promotion.
Wouldn't have thought that, no. The Bridges, we're talking about this from the main event.
By the way, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention Pete Rose's phenomenal showing in this.
Oh, yeah.
When he comes out.
Tombstone by Kane.
Well, yeah, but
the shtick was awesome.
The shtick was incredible. He just comes out, and again, this goes back to, it was a different time period. celebrities kind of came out and just made some some token wrestling jokes. He comes out and just starts insulting the Boston crowd. He's like, I left tickets for Bill Buckner, but he bent over and couldn't pick them up. And, he's like, yeah, we beat. And I think he even comes out. He's like, yeah, we played you guys in the World Series and we beat your ass. And Jim Ross is like, my goodness. And then he gets Tombstone again. He gets Tombstone by Kane to kind of give Kane some heat.
Yeah.
And they would go, pardon the pun, with some heat, but they'd have the Inferno match the next month, which was terrible, of course. But
it was.
But I mean, it went to show afterwards that Kane was sticking around, and Undertaker does win the match, but it wasn't maybe I'm just wrong. I just imagine going into this Undertaker very clean win, goes on to something new.
Okay.
I was surprised, and I was wrong. Kane did deserve. Now I'd like to just point out when I'm wrong. Kane did deserve to stay around.
Right.
Not for 13 years, but he did deserve to stay around for a little bit.
I would agree with that.
No one deserves to stay around for 13 years.
Not always near the top of the card as well. The Undertaker, the bridge from talking about this to the main event, he had wrestled Shawn Michaels, as you indicated, at the Royal Rumble. They did the gimmick of where Undertaker subsequently burned in the coffin by Kane, but the historical footnote of greatest interest was at the Royal Rumble, Shawn Michaels taking a horrific bump going out of the ring. When I see it on replay, knowing what happened, I wince every time.
Yeah, but you know what?
He hit his back on the coffin.
At the time, it didn't. There's been worse, but there's been, like, when Mick Foley, for instance, is thrown off the top of a Hell in a Cell and, finishes the match.
Yeah.
That looks on paper
But shattering your vertebrae on a coffin edge.
It was the way. Well, yeah, but
that's the worst.
It's because you know what happened that I think makes it hurt a little bit more.
Right.
But when it happened, it was like, okay, he just must have hit it totally wrong. It's one of those things where it didn't. Like, watching it live, you're like, ooh, probably.
Right.
But you're not like, oh, he's gone for 4.5 years. You can kiss your career by Shawn
Right.
Michaels. You didn't think it at the time.
Right.
And it's worth it because Shawn Michaels, look, he was at this point behaving by all accounts like a complete ass backstage. Okay, there were some rumors that he didn't want to do a job for Steve Austin at WrestleMania, and that is disgraceful. Okay, if that's true. Okay, I mean, if there was ever a time period where, as you as a champion have to know it's time to do your job, it was this show. I mean, the Iron Sheik, January 23rd, 1984, is calling Shawn, you got to do the job, man.
Well, and it became a moot point because Shawn knew at a certain point he just couldn't go anyways.
And big thumbs up, though, because he was obviously horribly injured.
He
had no business wrestling.
Right.
Had he not been the world champion putting over Steve Austin that night, no way he
I don't want to diminish his physical sacrifice, but by the same token, this was the era of pilled-up Shawn, and that's how he made it through.
Yeah, and also remember, they kept him completely out of the ring. This is the only time. This is the only match he wrestled after the Royal Rumble. He was not.
Right.
He was taken off the No Way Out of Texas pay-per-view.
Yes.
That month, where he was. It was. I mean, he couldn't even do an 8-man. An 8-man brawl, he couldn't even do.
Right.
They kept him in here, so there's about 2 months time, and then he doesn't wrestle again for 4.5 years. And this is the best. It's funny that I've been so complimentary on the show because there's no standout match. This is the main event is probably the best match on the show. It's I think like a 4-star match, and maybe that some say that's generous, but it's not a top 20. Despite the fact there's no top 25 WrestleMania matches on the show.
Right.
I rate this as a top 4 WrestleMania. It was just the pop Austin gets coming out. If there's a bigger pop in wrestling history, I'm not sure I know it.
And with a healthy Shawn Michaels, this could have been a 4.5-star match.
Oh, with a healthy Shawn Michaels, this could have been one of the all-time classics.
Well, by the same token, though, keep in mind this was post-neck injury for Austin. He was still feeling his way back, and mostly in the brawling kind of a style.
Yeah, well,
that held it back also.
Well, yeah, true, but, I mean, Austin had some great 2 months later, Austin had, I thought, the best match of the year in the WWF against Dude Love at Over the Edge, okay?
But he was still feeling his way back at this point. The last thing I want to say about this, it was a point that Bret Hart made. God help me, it seems like I'm always, taking issue with something he said, even though he's a 2-time past guest on the show. He's been very gracious to us, but something he said in his book about, Vince didn't have the money to pay me, but he had the money to pay Mike Tyson for this.
That's a selfish comment.
I got to tell you, Bret, money much better spent, because Mike Tyson was the final piece of the engine to launch Stone Cold Steve Austin into the mainstream and light the fuse for the next era.
Yeah, and we need to talk about that. They did the thing with Tyson where he came in and he
and
counted
Austin.
Michaels out and endorsed Austin.
Yes.
And they were kind of like, we're cool, And again, it's not always about, and you'll love this coming from the liberal Larry here sitting next to you. Okay, it's not about what always is fair in life.
Right.
Again, Owen Hart, was it fair, nice, whatever the term is, that they kind of held him hostage post Bret, and then from a storyline perspective just had him lose to Triple H? Probably it's not fair from his perspective, but for the overall promotion it was the right move, just like it was to get rid of Bret Hart and give his money to Mike Tyson for the show, because Bret Hart would not have drawn, and we saw this from the previous 4 years of WrestleManias, would not have drawn 800,000 buys.
Right. Yeah, there's just no way it would have happened. I mean, Austin came in. He was the final piece of the puzzle.
And I thought Michaels was better as the heel to drop to Austin than Bret Hart would have been here.
Well,
I think
it was fresher. It was much fresher.
Yeah, because, Bret and Austin, I know that the, kind of, I guess the urban legend is that it was going to be Bret kind of doing the job back to Austin from the previous year.
It would have been full circle from having beaten Austin the 2 times previously in the big matches. It would have been a little bit of full circle, but I like the freshness of Austin Michaels.
So did I. And again, that Attitude Era, I know Michaels was not a big part of it.
Yeah.
He was kind of just around for the beginning. I loved the interviews, DX. I know that they were like that. He wasn't very complimentary towards anyone else in the promotion, but
right.
I thought he did a very, very good job on the mic building this match, and I don't think Bret Hart would have done as good a job as Shawn Michaels did, as positioning himself as the chief antagonist of the company. Bret kind of always, his heel shtick was that he was right. He kind of, like, Michaels knew what he was doing was,
right,
from a character perspective, was wrong and stuff like that.
And he reveled in it.
Yes, and he was much better as kind of like the prancing around guy, whereas Bret was kind of a man's man.
When you call yourself a degenerate, you're not looking to point out the underlying rightness of your actions.
He was just. I thought he was better in this role than Bret would have been, and some people can disagree, but they're wrong.
Now, the one thing is, I'll give you this, as we're starting to transition to WrestleMania 15 and moving forward, and the tiny bit of macro.
Do you
that
agree that this is
one
of the best WrestleManias ever?
I agree. I watched it at the time and I loved it. The only thing was, in looking at this, for Vince McMahon, and I'm just looking at it in a kayfabe perspective, Bret Hart would have been much better for Vince McMahon to buddy up to pre-WrestleMania, because McMahon was basically looking at Shawn Michaels, the degenerate, as the lesser of two evils. It didn't hurt in the build, mind you, but I look at it from a creative direction. The marriage of Shawn Michaels and Vince McMahon was an odd one, and it's just as well in terms of Shawn's back that it was a short-term one, because Vince McMahon being on the same side of DX just didn't add up.
Well, and they really didn't, though, if you remember.
He didn't insert himself, mind you, but it was they asked him on a Raw. They asked him on a Raw, wwho are you rooting for? I'm rooting for Shawn Michaels.
Oh, yeah, but that was that was only...
planting the seeds?
Yeah, Shawn Michaels, basically, it was kind of a fill in the blank there.
Right.
That was setting up for post-WrestleMania, because remember, Austin was like, it wouldn't have mattered. Steve Austin could have been wrestling Steve Lombardi, like that, and he would have said, "I'm cheering for Steve Lombardi."
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Like, because Michaels was always very insulting of McMahon the whole time, building up to it. McMahon, while he was booed building up to that WrestleMania 14, it was nothing like coming out of that show where he immediately after, and as we moved to WrestleMania 15, positioned himself as the lead heel in the company before he would then, of course, for most of the summer, it was kind of a McMahon endorsed Mick Foley and then Kane kind of as his henchman.
Right.
Where the top feud was clearly Austin McMahon rather than Austin versus a heel wrestler. It was not until the Survivor Series where they found their guy in The Rock, and it was a phenomenal job of building to it, how he was positioned as the main heel in the company after the Survivor Series. When he turns heel, becomes the corporate champ. He kind of did the pseudo-face turn. People were just really cheering for him.
That was a great stretch.
And he was positioned as a face, but he never really did an official face turn. The crowd was just really cheering for him a lot. And they made him into the corporate champ at the Survivor Series, and that was one of those moments where it's like, okay, there's very clearly two big stars in this promotion above everyone else. You knew probably the day after, because they did the one-on-one match, and they kind of screw Austin out of it, where there's a lot of interference and it was a not clean finish.
Undertaker hit him in the head with a shovel.
Yes, and you knew that you would build toward a Rock Austin main event the following year at WrestleMania 15, and it would do huge business because those were the two clear. I mean, at that point, they were bigger. I remember, as an aside, they were the two biggest names, but it was very clear when they got in the ring against each other, WrestleMania 15, they were the two biggest names in the business. Mm-hmm. I remember watching Rock cut a promo as the corporate champ where he buried all of the WCW guys' catchphrases. Do you remember the promo I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do.
Where he's like, where it's just like the most electrifying line goes, and he would start doing a Hogan line, and then he would cut himself off. He's like, no, that's not it. And then he did his line. And I remember watching at the time and being like, you know what? 6 months ago, this would have been ridiculous. I'm like, The Rock is just much cooler, much better, and a much bigger star than all of those guys in WCW, including your boy Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
Okay.
No doubt.
You know, he was just. It was just like, God, the way this guy's carrying himself. It's like, well, where did this come from?
Right.
You know, Jim Cornette always says he saw it in him, and was very big on The Rock, and he was his biggest supporter. But I remember it was at that. I remember watching. I was like, God, he's insulting Hulk Hogan and has every right to.
Yeah. Yeah,
It didn't come across as like Shane Douglas insulting Ric Flair.
Oh, yeah. I mean, all of Shane Douglas's shtick always seemed forced.
He believed it, but it was just like, I didn't believe it. It's like, dude, you're not as good as Ric Flair.
Well, that's the thing, and that's what I mean by forced. It was a thing of, we're supposed to believe that had it not been for politics, you could have had a better career than Ric Flair. Versus anything The Rock said, he had credibility.
Yeah, when The Rock said, he's like, this is the most electrifying, and you're like, yeah,
right.
The Rock shtick right now is so much cooler than Hogan's shtick.
Right.
So,
but in a macro sense, here's something that's very unfortunate, because as WrestleMania 1 was the first WrestleMania of the boom period, and WrestleMania 14 would be the next, would be the first one of the next boom period. WrestleMania 15 sucked a whole lot, just like WrestleMania 2 did.
Now, WrestleMania 1 was the first of that, just because it was the first.
Right,
I mean, some could argue that 84, but point well taken.
84 was the first year of the boom, but yeah, it was the first. We went from the WrestleMania that started the boom in both instances being followed by a very lackluster second WrestleMania.
This drop-off, though, from 14 to 15 in terms of quality of show is far more pronounced than I'd say 1 to 2. Just because one was not on the level of a 14.
Right.
I know from a business perspective, a notoriety perspective, there's some comparisons, but yeah, 15, other than the Austin Rock, which was it
was a one-match show, and it delivered.
And
it did deliver.
It technically, I know wrestling fans, is not their first match on
right.
pay-per-view. They had a pseudo-match brawl thing
for the IC title
at the Generation X.
Yeah,
that pay-per-view, December 97. But this was their first true match on pay-per-view.
First main event match.
Yeah, it's their first of 3 matches at a WrestleMania.
Yeah.
They alternate years, as we'll get through here. Obviously, it's probably... I'd put it in the middle. It's obviously nowhere near as good as the 17, but
right.
I liked it better than WrestleMania 19 just because I hate that dynamic was bad, I thought. The dynamic was right. You had the heel corporate... This was one of the last WrestleManias, I think, where they did a very traditional build.
Yeah.
And it worked, where you build your heel champion up, and he loses to the babyface challenger, who's the top... You know what I'm saying?
Right.
This was kind of like, Hogan winning it back from Savage. Just had that feel to it.
It did.
And much like a WrestleMania 5, okay, which is a total one-match show that did huge numbers on pay-per-view, the undercard reeked on this. This is universally hailed as one of the worst WrestleManias ever. It's certainly in my bottom 3, along with 9 and 11. And the reason this one gets so maligned is that it's got the Vince Russo fingerprints all over it. People killed the Royal Rumble of that year. They killed the King of the Ring of that year. This was kind of the height of Vince Russo's booking period before he leaves to go to WCW and ruins that particular organization. And it does need to be said that the WWE during this period was doing incredible ratings. I mean, out-of-this-world ratings that they will never do again.
A lot of guys were really over, but that's what makes this show stink. How could you have a WrestleMania like this with so many guys that were over, particularly compared to where they were 12 months ago?
Now, here's what's interesting, though.
What?
It's been a little revisionist. This WrestleMania, I remember at the time, and maybe I was just reading in the wrong places and talking to the wrong people, was not ripped the way other bad WrestleManias have been.
I agree with that.
You know, it seemed like, okay, WrestleMania happened. It's like, yeah, okay, everything, everything was just, I mean, they would go on in April and May of 99 to do just phenomenal television ratings. In June, the Austin Undertaker match doing the biggest cable rating they've ever done in June that year. I mean, the ratings, this didn't hurt it at all. So, again, it just shows kind of like maybe people like you and us compared to the public at large. The public at large got what they wanted. They got the guys that were over doing their shticks, even if it didn't necessarily make that much sense in some of the matches that we'll get to. But they saw their big money match. The right guy goes over. Austin beats The Rock for the title. The Rock was, at this point now, you talk about the previous year, it was very obvious The Rock was going to be a very strong baby face.
Right.
And kind of, it was at this point a 1A, 1B. with him and Austin.
It was even more pronounced than it was a year ago, where I said a year ago at WrestleMania, it first became evident, okay, he's got a little bit of a run left as a heel, then he's going to be a red-hot face. Now, I mean, they were trying so hard to keep him heel, even with the stuff like, don't do Sing Along with the Rock.
Yeah, that was good. And he was, the thing that was cool, though, is he still acted like a heel. You know what? He would do very, like...
But he acted like a heel when he was a face a lot of times, too. The way he was kind of a bully, quite frankly.
Oh, yeah, he was. Prick. Yeah, he was.
But it was great. It was entertaining.
Heel, he was really unbelievable. I mean, this was during the period, if you remember, he'd wrestled the matches with Foley, obviously, the famous I Quit match where, he plastered him with, 8, whatever it was, 15, 20 unprotected chair shots. He was doing things like, remember he would get on commentary and start doing the commentary for his own matches when he was fighting the guy. He would shove Michael Cole, grab the headset, and he would start doing commentary.
That was awesome.
Yeah, I mean he was just thinking so outside the box, and it was funny because as a worker, he had not reached his crescendo yet, but it was very clear now that it wasn't just Austin as the main guy. You now had there was no, if you're going to compare Hogan and Austin to each other as the lead dogs of each boom period, there was no Rock in Hogan's era. I mean, Randy Savage was probably that second guy, but it was always very clear that it was Hogan then Savage.
Right.
It wasn't that clear. I mean, they were in '99 for that period between this WrestleMania, not to completely dismiss this WrestleMania, which is largely forgettable, but between this WrestleMania and then the Survivor Series where they write Austin out because he's injured, it was really close. I know they kind of kept The Rock away from the title program.
Right.
For a lot of, he would feud with Mr. Ass, which was, laughable, but it was very close. It was a 1A, 1B situation, not a 1 and 2 situation for who was the most over face in that company.
No, it's absolutely true. The other thing is here, too, leading up to WrestleMania, they gave away a match on pay-per-view, but they gave away this is how confident they were. They gave away a match, the pay-per-view beforehand, that had been a dream match for the past 11 months. They finally put Vince McMahon in the ring in a cage match, no less, with Steve Austin.
But that was a great match.
It was a great way to do it, yeah.
I've talked to people inside of, so some people with some, inside knowledge and knowledge of the inner workings of this company before, okay?
Okay.
About the Elimination Chamber and how it's positioned.
Okay.
And they kind of, in my opinion, that it's poorly positioned. It's a pay-per-view that the match can mean a lot, and it probably should be elsewhere. Logistically, it's kind of a nightmare how you have to have, especially with 2 titles now.
Right.
You're putting 2 titles on the line half time.
I hate titles being on the line in the Elimination Chamber.
That's
it
true.
should be a contention match.
Again, different podcast for a different day. Probably. Austin McMahon, a feud where you've got your clear babyface who's going to go over and win the title the next month. What do you do in between him winning the Rumble, and he didn't actually win the Rumble. McMahon did. That's why they did. Yeah, that's why they had it. That was the impetus for actually doing the match finally. What do you do in between the Royal Rumble and him winning the title? It always comes across as just kind of biding time.
Yeah.
And this was now it did a disappointing number.
It was
on pay-per-view.
Brilliant.
It did do a disappointing. Vince McMahon has not been very good on pay-per-view when he wrestles in terms of drawing power, but it did work. I agree with you. It was the totally right match to do at the right time. But Austin goes over. And, by the way, the Big Show debuts in that match. Paul White, as he was known for one night. The Giant from WCW. And they just did a lot of curious things on this undercard. I mean, we don't need to go into a lot of them. Remember, they switched the Road Dogg and Billy Gunn in their match. The Road Dogg kind of, like any team, they immediately want to split the guys up and have them go to solo success.
Right.
And it kind of worked over here. Billy Gunn was always he was, of course, one of the most, in my opinion, overrated workers of all time.
Yep.
Dolph Ziggler to me is a better. I've always called him Billy Gunn with talent because they kind of look alike. I think.
That's true.
But he actually where Billy Gunn, he was always supposed to be, this great breakout talent, solo star. It never happened. I remember he wrestled Ken Shamrock going up to the show. And, it was just obvious, man. The guy just didn't have any moves.
Well, he didn't. He looked the part, but he couldn't bring anything else to it. It's why I told you I really disliked the Smoking Guns as the anchor babyface team of the earlier 90s. I hated them in that role. They did nothing for me. And it had nothing to do with, you said that you didn't like them wearing jeans. I don't like that either. It looks dime store and indie. But give me
I just thought it was uncomfortable.
Give me guys
I didn't
who
like their
can,
mustaches and jeans.
Yeah,
That was bad.
give me guys who can deliver in the ring, and they never did that
They were
for
actually,
me.
believe it or not, he actually was. I don't know if it was effort level or what it was. They actually did some kind of like cool. I couldn't get past the gimmick,
Yeah.
but here it was. He had a good gimmick, and he just died. He's just one of those guys that's good in a tag team because
Yeah.
he was the guy who always gets the hot tag
Right.
in the New Age Outlaws, and it always worked. But you can't do hot tag offense for a
Right.
10-minute match because he would just come in, he would just like do all these punches, and he had a drop kick, and he just didn't have a lot. He was very bland.
They switched them up, so rather than go in order, let's get this part of the crappy part of the undercard out of the way
but
here.
yeah, so he was involved.
Yeah.
Like he was feuding with Ken Shamrock at the time, and like they had
And
a
Val
three-way,
Venus,
and Val
yeah.
Venus got involved. There was the ill-fated Ryan Shamrock angle.
Yeah.
Val Venus, by the way, for people want to make he was very over at this time period.
He was.
And they sort of just like randomly, like they had on an episode of Raw, Billy Gunn win the Hardcore title,
Yeah.
which the Road Dogg had kind of been feuding with Al Snow and
Hardcore
Holly
yeah.
with, and Road Dogg actually did work. He was obviously a much more limited worker on
Right.
paper than Billy Gunn, but he was getting over kind of doing the hardcore stuff, and they inexplicably switched up. Like the Road Dogg, didn't he win? Like he won the Intercontinental title.
He did. He
on
did.
the same
Yeah.
Raw.
OMG Swerve.
Yeah, that was total Russo right
Yeah.
there. That's why people. It's like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
Like it makes no just because people know it's coming, the match doesn't mean you have to like go against it. So and then they like both lose the titles on the show.
Well,
I think.
Road Dogg won.
He did?
Four Corners elimination match for the
That shows
Intercontinental
how memorable
title.
that
Yeah.
was.
He defeated Ken Shamrock, Goldust with Blue Meanie and Ryan Shamrock and Val Venus.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too. That Goldust was randomly inserted in the Intercon, even though like for no reason he had been brought back. He was Dustin Runnels just for short bit, like a
Right.
Bible thumping guy,
Right.
And then he like.
Well, it
came
was a
back as-
swerve on He Is Coming, and they made it seem like it was going to do a religious gimmick, but it was a swerve to him becoming Goldust again.
Yes. And so both matches and programs sucked.
Every
here
time
on
we're
this.
talking about Vince Russo, we say swerve. We should have to, pound a shot or something
Yes,
here.
well, I'm down.
Yeah,
I'm down. Hey, I got some Patron right there over
Yeah.
your left shoulder there, buddy.
Very nice.
Okay.
Very nice. And you're not talking about Anthony Patron.
No, I'm not. No.
The other one, in the Hardcore title match, Hardcore Holly defeated Billy Gunn, who came in as the champion, and Al Snow in a triple threat Hardcore match for the title. Other meaningless undercard crap on Heat. D'Lo Brown and Test won when Droz and the Godfather eliminated one another. A 21-man battle royal to become the number one contenders to the tag team titles. So they were randomly paired up to lose to Owen Hart and Jeff Jarrett, the tag team champions.
Yeah, but in their defense, Mark, they had a program. Owen and Jarrett were. I thought they were a pretty good team together, pretty thrown together for being a thrown together heel team.
Absolutely.
And Deborah was kind of billed as the star of the team, but they were feuding with D'Lo Brown and Mark Henry at the time. Mark Henry, wouldn't you know, got injured.
Yeah.
And they did this dumb gimmick where they had a battle royal on Heat, and the last two guys would challenge for the titles.
Yeah.
So, D'Lo was kind of involved in the program, so you kind of knew he would get. I guess they shouldn't have done it at all with D'Lo. They should have just been like, "Tough luck, D'Lo. Your buddy got hurt and you got screwed." But Test was a heel. He was in the corporation.
Yeah.
This made no sense. I mean, this is one of those things that if you watch it, you're like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just one of those things where I think they liked Test and wanted to get him on the card.
Right.
So even though it made completely no sense at all, they teamed up with D'Lo Brown, and they, of course, lose.
Complete garbage.
Thank God they didn't win, though, actually.
Oh.
It's better that they lost than won.
That's true. 35 seconds, the Brawl for All match. Bart Gunn, the Brawl for All champion. Kids, go look this up on YouTube, and it is hilarious to watch Bart Gunn's nose get punched back into his brain by Butterbean. Oh, my God, this was something.
Look, it was just, you talk about Billy Gunn not having the goods. Bart Gunn had even less goods.
Right.
And he was kind of the Brawl for All was a disaster. That was one of Jim Ross's real bad ideas.
Guys got hurt.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be a setup for Steve Williams to win it, but then he got hurt.
He did, and he gets knocked out. But
he got knocked out, but then he also got hurt.
Yeah, he
Combo.
loses to Bart Gunn, and it was one of those things that Bart Gunn winds up winning it, and
useless charisma vacuum winning
and it's one of those things that's like, okay, like, we talk about how they kind of fell into these things. Like,
Yeah.
you think, okay, well, maybe they've got something to go with Bart Gunn now. then he kind of remembered he was Bart Gunn, and it just wasn't very good. And they tried to put him in a tough guy, and this was bad.
Brawl for all. It's like, hey, morons, there's a reason in the early days of the 20th century they started working this crap instead of letting it be a shoot.
Yeah, I mean, and they kind of knew that. I'm sure. I mean, who would have? They kind of knew Bart Gunn was going to get his lunch. So it was stupid. It was awful.
Yeah, this next one again. This could have meant so much more. Mankind defeated the Big Show by disqualification. He wins to become special guest referee of the main event at 6:50. It was a thing where he won by DQ because they just brought in the Big Show. They were still trying to protect him a little bit, but it was
just a stupid way to do it. Just put the Big Show against a bum and have him beat him in like 10 seconds.
And this was a late announced match in true Russo fashion. This could have been used again. I think they did a pretty terrific buy rate anyways off Austin and The Rock, but still, this could have contributed to the buy rate had you treated it like a real match.
Yeah, but it boiled down to, and they get into this situation a lot more nowadays, where it's like, okay, you have Mick Foley, who had won the title against The Rock, tremendously over, was at probably the pinnacle of his career.
Right.
As an over babyface, you have the new heel, the Big Show, and it's like, okay, what do we do with these two?
Right.
So they have them have a meaningless match, and Foley always wanted to be a part of the main event, and it was like their weak way of getting the first time in back-to-back years, a very weak way of involving him in the main event of WrestleMania.
That's true, yeah, because he had lost the title back to The Rock after winning it for the first time. The rest of the undercard here, Kane...
It's all DX related. It was the death of DX, really.
It was, yeah. Kane
for at least a while.
with China, Kane with China defeated Triple H by disqualification at 11:33. The only match of the undercard over 10 minutes. True, again, Russo booking, Crash TV, even on pay-per-view.
Yeah, and people might have just thought you misspoke there.
Yeah.
And you didn't.
I did.
Kane with China. They had done this. This was vintage Russo.
Yeah.
A 1 hour face turn from China here. China had joined the corporation, turning on Triple H. I think it was an I Quit match against The Rock on Raw. And so Triple H and China were kind of feuding here, and Kane got involved by proxy. It was bizarre that Kane was... This is so Russo. Kane was involved in the corporation but didn't want to be. China turns back with Triple H, revealing it was all a setup to get at Kane.
Right.
And then it bleeds into the next match where Triple H and China are reunited and turn heel on X-Pac and they join the corporation.
Yeah, Shane successfully defended the European Championship against X-Pac in that match. And with the breakup of Triple H and X-Pac there, the dissolution of DX and really...
And then from there, the Outlaws would break up Mr. Ass. Billy Gunn turns heel, and the Road Dogg stays face, and X-Pac and Road Dogg kind of were buddies, and they wanted to push Triple H and Billy Gunn as the two heels.
And to an extent, we can say this was history. I guess we could say, because it was this heel run that Triple H started here that really led to his mega stardom. And if we're going to be not cynical and talk about the other things that led to his mega stardom, this run in '99 and 2000.
Well, yeah, but let's talk about it. To be fair,
he was
very bland. He was very bland and not over at the beginning of the heel turn. I thought. I thought at first the push, and I was not alone. The push was very unjustified.
And I think you talk about Cleveland. Wasn't it Cleveland that summer? That he did the promo, I Am the Game. I think that was in Cleveland.
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure it was. Summer '99, that I Am the Game.
We're getting into the weed years, like I said, where I need help reading the card. Unlike WrestleMania 6, where I could mortify you and name the card off without looking, I start getting confused during this period.
Yeah, you're relying on Wikipedia as much as me.
Yeah.
Sable defended the Women's Championship against Tori 509 in a match that pretty much meant nothing, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, this was like a stalker thing. This was they did the same thing a couple years later, WrestleMania, with Trish Stratus and what's her face, Mickie James.
Mickie James.
Yeah, it was very similar, except much worse.
Except it was great. It was much better when Mickie James licked the V.
Yeah, and Joe Linway came in and gave his love for that. That was good. But this was worthless. And Shane McMahon, by the way, I wanted to back up here as we're getting hailed on here. By the way, on the North Coast. Yeah. That was the first time Shane McMahon did a one-on-one match. There was a lot of intrigue going into that.
There really was, yeah. It had the unexpected ending. Shane McMahon, again, a pretty good worker for a guy who didn't work that much and
He
everything
tried.
like
I mean,
that.
they
A guy
did a
who
good
tried
job.
hard,
Yeah.
and who was eminently capable of being carried by X-Pac. This was one of the longer matches on the undercard at 8:41. The match that I guess would be the semi-main out of the bunch here,
boy.
for lack of anything else. 9:48, The Undertaker with Paul Bearer defeated the Big Boss Man in a Hell in a Cell match. One of the most forgettable Hell in a Cell matches ever.
As a matter of fact,
Next to Hell in a Kennel. Yeah.
Well, that's not a Hell in a Cell,
Okay.
in my opinion.
All right.
This, though, when they ever show a Hell in a Cell video package, this would be funny because we've got one coming up at the current WrestleMania, Triple H and Undertaker. They never show this one in the video package.
Right.
I think a couple times they've shown a clip just because they ended it with the Boss Man hanging from the. This is when they
Symbolically hanging.
Yes. They did. This was the Triple H. This was a heel versus heel match. It was that bizarre period where the Undertaker had come back with the Ministry of Darkness.
Right.
It was before that they did the corporate ministry. Again, this had Russo's fingerprints all over it. It was just, this was basically, and keep in mind, what's funny is this is before the streak became a big thing. This is only when people like you and I knew the Undertaker had never lost a WrestleMania match. This was just an excuse to put the Undertaker over because he got the big heel push post WrestleMania.
Right. And while the Boss Man hadn't done much in this reign in the WWE, or WWF at the time, he carried a big name from the boom years, so it was a thing of the residual.
It was kind of funny.
Much like when they brought King Kong Bundy back to face him 4 years previously. Coast off of the name.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember when he debuted as the head of security of the corporation.
Right.
That drew heat. It was kind of like, okay, he was always lost at sea in WCW because everyone looked at him and saw Big Boss Man.
Right.
And it's like he came back and was allowed to be called the Big Boss Man again.
Right.
And look, he wasn't good. I mean, but it was it just seemed like everything was in its right place, as the old Radiohead song goes.
Exactly. And by the way, and I said this before, and I know I'm in the tiny minority in that I liked the Big Bubba Rogers character better than the Big Boss Man. I'm in the tiny minority on this one also, since we're talking about these guys here. Undertaker of this era. Personally, my preference for his theme music has always been the Ministry era theme music. That was my favorite. That was my favorite.
That was
Undertaker.
Phenomenal rhythm, Rick Morris.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, exactly.
Rhythm Ricky.
With my quasi-laryngitis, I'm sure that sounded even worse. But yeah, that is my favorite Undertaker theme music era.
This was like a bizarre period for him. It was the Where To, Stephanie, or it came out shortly after this. They got real over the top with it. But look, he deserved to go over. Everyone knew he was going to be the lead heel because it was very obvious that The Rock was going to turn babyface after the show. So he was positioned as the main heel.
Well, and this was heel versus heel. It was very odd in that regard.
It was, and it was even odder when the Boss Man was the Undertaker's henchman 2 months after the show. So.
Right, and it's a thing where, and I guess this is what makes it all the more unusual. For Vince, who, as we regress for a second to the start of where we were at with the setup for the Attitude Era, Vince in November of '97, Shades of Grey. Well, Shades of Grey, not so much, because while the baby faces acted more heelish, there were still baby faces and there were still heels. Rare that you would get heel versus heel in a high-profile match.
Yeah.
This was it.
Yeah, and this was kind of one of those things where it was kind of sort of like the star being cheered over the clear JTTS guy,
Right. That's absolutely true. The main event, we talked about it a little bit. It went 16:52. No disqualification match for the championship. That was a way, again, my guess is that you were starting to see already some things with Austin and the neck and concerns about the health. They tried to garbage it up where they could as far as
they always
get away
did.
with
During
stuff.
this period, they always had that.
Right.
They just did that because I think they would always do those long brawls. This was during the period where every main event match featured this long brawl. Like, hey, remember the old walk with me around the arena while we brawl thing, remember? And I think they would just always kind of randomly make these matches no DQ and no count out just to cover for it because some of the more jaded members of the audience were like, come on, I'm the ref not count to 10 yet,
Yeah, exactly. Honestly, I
you
was
were
that
probably
guy.
doing
I was
that.
guy,
You were probably doing that.
Yeah, I was. But they did it, and it seemed like it worked here.
And in a no-brainer, Austin goes over and beats The Rock, and The Rock turns babyface.
Yeah.
But I think we can agree that while WrestleMania 14, one of the best WrestleManias of all time, this one of the worst.
This was.
Along with 9 and 11, one of the 3 definitive worst WrestleManias.
It was. And in the words of, if I may paraphrase the road dog Jesse James, this was dog shiznit.
Yeah. There we go. There hasn't even been a WrestleMania since this period even nearing this one's lack of quality. I mean, there's only been one, I think, and we'll hit it, by the way, in this podcast, that I even thought was a subpar WrestleMania. This was the last awful WrestleMania.
That's true.
There's not been, I always talked about going back to the previous, you could break them up into different groupings.
Right.
The bottom 5, I have 9, 11, 15, 1, and 2.
Right.
Is my bottom 5. So, I mean, there you go. I mean, there hasn't been anything in the last 10 years really even getting close to this.
I guess we got to give them credit for that much, at least. They really scraped bottom with this one.
Well, because they don't do the Russo stuff anymore. It's like, look, stars, let's make what should be meaningful, let's make that meaningful. If it's not going to be meaningful, to hell with it.
Absolutely. That's how that went.